He did not invite his ex-wife to his wedding because he missed her. He invited her because he wanted a room full of witnesses when she finally looked small. Evelyn Harper knew that the moment she saw the place card. It sat on a linen-covered table near the front of the ballroom at the Plaza Hotel, pressed between crystal glasses and white roses, its black calligraphy neat enough to feel cruel. Former Mrs. Pierce. Not Evelyn Harper. Not even Ms. Harper. Just the title Daniel had taken from her, polished and placed where everyone could see it. For a few seconds she stood there with her small silver clutch in one hand and the soft hum of a string quartet floating above her head. The ballroom glowed with old New York elegance, gold trim catching the light, champagne moving from tray to tray, guests speaking in lowered voices that were never quite low enough. She could feel them turning before she saw them turn. Former colleagues. Wives of investors. Friends who had disappeared after the divorce as if loyalty were something assigned by net worth. Their eyes moved over her midnight blue dress, her bare neck, her calm face, searching for evidence that she had come broken. Evelyn gave them none. She pulled out her chair and sat down as if the name card belonged to someone else. Across the aisle, Daniel Pierce stood beneath an arch of imported white orchids, smiling the kind of smile he used for photographers, boardrooms, and people he planned to underestimate. His tuxedo fit perfectly. His hair was touched with just enough silver to look expensive. At his side, Samantha Reed turned slightly, letting the train of her wedding gown glide over the marble floor while two bridesmaids adjusted it with careful hands. Samantha was beautiful in the glossy, practiced way of women who knew exactly where the cameras were. When her gaze found Evelyn, her mouth curved. Not warmly. Victoriously. Evelyn lowered her eyes to the folded napkin in front of her and smoothed one corner with her thumb. It was a tiny motion, almost invisible, but it steadied her. She had learned that silence could be a room of its own, a place no one could enter without permission. Daniel had not learned that. Yet. He was still watching for the flinch. The ceremony began with soft piano music and a minister speaking about new beginnings, second chances, and the courage to choose happiness. Each phrase landed in the ballroom like something expensive and hollow. When Daniel repeated his vows, his voice carried just a little too far, as if he wanted Evelyn to hear every word. Samantha laughed lightly at the right moments, glanced back at the guests, and let her diamond bracelet flash under the chandeliers. Evelyn watched without blinking. Not because it did not hurt. It had hurt once, deeply enough to change the shape of her days. But pain, when carried with dignity long enough, stopped begging to be seen. By the time the guests rose to applaud, Evelyn remained seated for one extra heartbeat, her hands folded together, her wedding ring finger bare and still. Daniel noticed. His smile tightened. Then, during the reception, a waiter approached her table with a glass of sparkling water she had not ordered and a quiet apology in his eyes. Behind him, Samantha was laughing with a circle of guests, her voice bright as polished silver. Daniel crossed the room toward Evelyn as if walking onto a stage he owned. People made space for him. They always had. He stopped beside her chair, leaned just close enough to make the moment look intimate from a distance, and said, "I'm glad you came, Evelyn. I was not sure you would be strong enough." Around them, the conversation softened, waiting. Evelyn looked up at him, noticing the same cologne he wore when he used to come home after midnight and say the meeting ran late. She remembered that scent. She remembered believing him. Then she smiled, gentle and unreadable, and said nothing at all. Daniel's face flickered, just once. He had prepared for tears, anger, embarrassment, maybe even a quiet exit. He had not prepared for peace. At the head table, Samantha lifted her glass, watching them with a bride's confidence and a rival's curiosity. Evelyn reached for her own glass, took one calm sip, and set it back exactly where it had been. Outside the tall windows, Fifth Avenue moved under the evening lights, taxis sliding past strangers. Crossing sidewalks, the city continuing as if this room did not matter. And for the first time since opening that invitation, Evelyn felt something quiet settle inside her. Daniel thought he had saved her a front row seat to her humiliation. He had no idea he had placed her exactly where she needed to be when the truth walked in. Evelyn had not always known how to sit still under a room full of judgment. There had been a time when Daniel Pierce could make her heart race with one glance across a crowded space, long before he learned how to use silence as a weapon. Years earlier, before the tuxedos, before the magazine interviews, before the glass-walled office on Madison Avenue, Daniel had been a man in a wrinkled dress shirt sitting at a kitchen table in Queens with overdue bills spread around him like bad weather. Their apartment had been small enough that the refrigerator hummed through the bedroom wall, and in winter, the windows leaked cold air no matter how much tape Evelyn pressed around the edges. Daniel used to rub both hands over his face and say he was finished, that no investor would take a chance on a company with nothing but a rented laptop and a founder who could barely afford gas. Evelyn never let him hear fear in her voice. She made coffee at midnight, opened his files, rewrote his proposals, corrected his numbers, and turned his nervous ideas into sentences that sounded like vision. When his first investor meeting was scheduled in Midtown, she ironed his only navy suit on a towel because they did not own an ironing board. When he could not pay the design team, she sold the thin gold bracelet her mother had given her after college and told him she had picked up an extra consulting project. She watched him walk into rooms with words she had shaped, confidence she had lent him, and a future she had helped build piece by piece. In those days, Daniel still came home breathless with gratitude. He would lift her off the floor in that tiny kitchen and promise that when everything changed, she would never have to worry again. And then everything changed. The first new office came with a receptionist who said his name as if it belonged on the side of a building. The first luxury car came with tinted windows and a habit of arriving late. The first article called him a self-made visionary, and Evelyn remembered staring at the photograph, wondering how invisible a woman could become while standing close enough to be reflected in the glass behind him. Daniel began to correct her in public, softly at first, with a smile that made other people think it was affection. Then he stopped bringing her into meetings. Then he stopped asking her opinion. His phone began to stay face down at dinner. His shirts carried unfamiliar perfume beneath the sharper scent of expensive cologne. When Evelyn asked questions, Daniel sighed as if her pain were an inconvenience, as if loyalty had become embarrassing now that he could afford admiration. The night the marriage truly ended, they were standing in the hallway of their Upper West Side apartment, 12 stories above traffic that sounded like distant rain. He did not yell. Daniel had never needed to raise his voice to make a person feel small. He simply looked at her with tired impatience, and said she had been perfect for the beginning, but he needed someone who fit the life he had now. Evelyn remembered the way the city lights trembled through the window behind him, gold and cold, beautiful and indifferent. She remembered not crying until after he closed the bedroom door. Now, years later, sitting in the front row of his wedding reception at the Plaza, she watched Daniel accept congratulations from people who had never seen the kitchen table, the overdue bills, or the woman who had taught him how to look powerful before he was. A photographer asked him and Samantha to move closer together near the cake, and Daniel slipped an arm around his bride with practiced ease. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. The past moved through her quietly, not like an open wound anymore, but like an old song playing from another room. He had mistaken her devotion for weakness because it had been gentle. He had mistaken her patience for dependence because it had been quiet. But Evelyn had built one man before he broke her heart, and after he left, she had learned something Daniel still did not understand. A woman who knows how to build from nothing does not stay ruined for long. The applause around Daniel and Samantha softened into the clinking of silverware, the movement of chairs, the polished rhythm of a wedding reception designed to look effortless and cost a fortune. Evelyn remained at the front table with her glass of sparkling water untouched, while the ballroom settled into its next performance. A band began playing a slow, elegant version of an old love song near the far wall. Waiters moved between round tables with plates of herb-roasted chicken, buttered vegetables, and tiny towers of salad arranged like architecture. Everything was beautiful. Everything was controlled. And beneath it all, Evelyn could feel the room waiting for something. Daniel had always loved an audience. He loved the pause before he spoke, the way people leaned in, the way a room gave itself to him when he held a microphone. So when the best man finished a harmless story from college and handed the microphone toward the head table, Evelyn knew before Daniel stood that the evening had not finished using her. Samantha rose first. Her veil had been removed, and her blonde hair fell in careful waves over one shoulder. She looked radiant, but there was a brightness in her eyes that had nothing to do with happiness. It was the look of a woman who had found a way to turn another woman's pain into entertainment. She smiled at the guests, one hand resting lightly on Daniel's arm, and began thanking everyone for coming. Her voice was smooth, practiced, charming enough to make cruelty sound like wit. She thanked her parents, Daniel's partners, the friends who had flown in from Los Angeles and Palm Beach. Then her gaze moved toward Evelyn. The room seemed to notice at the same time. Conversations thinned. Forks paused above plates. Samantha tilted her head, as if the next words had just occurred to her, though Evelyn could see how carefully they had been rehearsed. She said she wanted to thank the past for making room for the future. A few guests laughed softly. Daniel lowered his eyes for half a second, but he did not stop her. Samantha continued, saying that every love story had a chapter that taught people what they truly deserved, and she was grateful Daniel had finally found the right woman to stand beside him. This time the laughter was louder, scattered across the ballroom like dropped glass. Evelyn felt the heat of attention move over her skin, but she did not bow her head. She looked at Samantha the way a person might look at rain against a window, aware of it, untouched by it. The photographer near the cake lifted his camera, then hesitated, unsure whether this was a moment he was supposed to capture or pretend not to see. Daniel took the microphone next, smiling with the confidence of a man who believed charm could excuse anything. He said Samantha had given him a new life, a brighter life, a life that matched the man he had become. Then, with a gentle laugh that made several guests lean closer, he added that some people were meant to help build the road, while others were meant to arrive at the destination. Evelyn heard the sentence clearly. She also heard what he thought it would do. He wanted her to shrink. He wanted her to remember the small apartment, the unpaid bills, the nights she spent building the road he now pretended had appeared beneath his feet. A woman at the next table pressed her lips together, not quite smiling, not quite ashamed. An older man who had once accepted Evelyn's revisions on Daniel's investor deck looked down at his menu. No one defended her. That, more than the words, felt familiar. Samantha lifted her champagne and said to second chances. Daniel raised his glass too, eyes fixed on Evelyn. The room followed. Crystal caught the chandelier light. Evelyn reached for her napkin, folded it once, and placed it beside her plate with careful precision. Then she lifted her sparkling water, not high enough to join the toast, only enough to take one quiet sip. The gesture was so small that anyone else might have missed it. Daniel did not. His smile faltered again, the same brief crack she had seen earlier. He had expected embarrassment. He had not expected grace. He had expected her to look like the woman he left behind. He had not understood that the woman he left behind no longer lived inside her. Samantha, unsettled by Evelyn's calm, leaned into the microphone one last time and said that she hoped everyone tonight could move forward with class. Evelyn set her glass down. The sound was soft, almost nothing, but the waiter standing near her table glanced at her as if he had heard a door closing. Around the ballroom, the music resumed, guests returned to their plates, and Daniel stepped back into the warmth of applause he had borrowed from people too polite to question him. Evelyn sat beneath the chandeliers with her shoulders relaxed, her face composed, and her right hand resting near the pale mark where a wedding ring had once been. She did not speak because the truth did not need her voice yet. Somewhere beyond the ballroom doors, beyond the polished marble hallway and the golden lobby, the evening was still unfolding. And Evelyn knew, with a calm that reached deeper than anger, that Daniel had just mistaken her silence for permission one final time. After the toast, the ballroom kept moving as if nothing had happened, but Evelyn's mind slipped backward to the first morning after the divorce became final. There had been no dramatic music, no clean ending, no sense of freedom arriving all at once. There was only a small apartment in Boston with 2 suitcases by the door, a mattress still wrapped in plastic, and pale winter light pressing through blinds that did not close properly. The apartment was on the 4th floor of an old brick building near the river, 600 square feet with uneven floors and a radiator that knocked loudly every hour like someone asking to be let in. Evelyn had stood in the middle of that room wearing the same coat she had worn to the courthouse, listening to the city wake up around her. Cars hissed over wet pavement. A delivery truck backed into an alley. Somewhere downstairs, a dog barked twice and went quiet. No one called. No one asked if she had eaten. No one said her name with tenderness. For the first time in years, she belonged to no one's schedule, no one's image, no one's version of success. It felt less like freedom than falling, but she breathed anyway. She unpacked slowly. 3 black dresses. 2 pairs of heels. A framed photograph she almost threw away and then turned face down in a drawer. A stack of notebooks filled with business ideas Daniel had once dismissed as too careful, too practical, too small. That winter, Evelyn learned how to survive in inches. She bought groceries with coupons clipped from a Sunday paper. She walked half a mile to a coffee shop because refills were cheaper there. She took consulting calls from a card table by the window, wearing a blazer over a sweater because the apartment stayed cold until noon. Some clients heard the steadiness in her voice and never guessed that her hands were wrapped around a mug for warmth. Others asked whether she had worked with Pierce and Company because of Daniel, and Evelyn answered with grace, even when the question carried the old assumption that she had been standing near power instead of helping create it. At night, when the city lights reflected in the dark glass of her window, she studied balance sheets from failing businesses and saw patterns other people missed. A restaurant group bleeding money through poor leases. A family-owned manufacturer losing contracts because no one had updated their supply chain. A non-profit drowning in administrative costs while donors disappeared. Evelyn did not promise miracles. She listened. She organized. She removed waste, rebuilt trust, and made broken companies breathe again. Her reputation did not arrive loudly. It came through quiet referrals, then careful emails, then phone calls from people who began with, "Someone told me you know how to fix difficult things." She accepted the difficult things. She understood them. Healing, she learned, was also restructuring. You looked honestly at what had failed. You stopped funding what was draining you. You protected what still had value. Month by month, the apartment changed. A real desk replaced the card table. A warm lamp stood beside the window. Fresh flowers appeared in a glass pitcher every Friday, not because anyone sent them, but because she bought them for herself from the corner market. On spring mornings, she walked along the Charles River before work, the air sharp and clean, her sneakers tapping the path. While rowers cut through silver water. She did not feel powerful then. She felt present. That was enough. Back inside the Plaza ballroom, Samantha's laughter rose above the music, and Daniel moved among his guests wearing the confidence of a man who believed the past had stayed exactly where he left it. Evelyn watched him from beneath the chandeliers and thought of that small Boston apartment, the cold mornings, the first client who paid her on time, the first night she slept without waking to check her phone. He had imagined divorce as the end of her story because it had been the end of his usefulness to her. But Evelyn knew what he did not. The life he discarded had not disappeared. It had gone quiet, gathered strength, and learned how to stand without applause. Evelyn met William Sterling on a rainy Tuesday morning in Boston, in a conference room that smelled faintly of coffee, polished wood, and nervous money. The meeting had been scheduled for 8 o'clock, early enough that the city outside still looked half awake, with gray rain sliding down the windows and traffic crawling along Atlantic Avenue below. Evelyn arrived 15 minutes before anyone else, carrying a leather folder, a plain black umbrella, and the calm expression she wore when a company was closer to collapse than its executives wanted to admit. The client was a regional medical supply firm with 3 warehouses, 2 lawsuits, and a board full of people who kept saying the word growth because they were afraid to say debt. Evelyn took the seat nearest the projector, opened the financial statements, and began marking numbers in the margin with a blue pen. She did not notice William at first. He was standing near the back window in a charcoal suit, speaking quietly with an attorney while the rain softened the skyline behind him. He was not the loudest man in the room. He did not need to be. There was a stillness around him that made people lower their voices without knowing why. When the meeting began, executives took turns explaining why the problems were temporary, why the market was misunderstood, why the numbers looked worse than they were. Evelyn listened without interrupting. Daniel had once called that habit passive. William seemed to understand it was precision. When the chief financial officer finished a polished explanation that avoided every difficult point, Evelyn turned one page and asked about a $12 million inventory discrepancy buried between two reporting periods. The room went quiet. A board member shifted in his chair. The chief financial officer smiled too quickly and said it was a timing issue. Evelyn looked down at the document, then back at him. Her voice stayed gentle. She said timing issues did not usually repeat for 6 straight quarters. No one laughed. No one moved. William looked at her then, fully, as if he had just found the only person in the room willing to tell the truth without needing to embarrass anyone. For the next hour, Evelyn walked them through the company piece by piece. She did not perform intelligence. She used it. She separated poor decisions from honest mistakes, weak leadership from impossible market pressure, panic from fact. She suggested closing 1 warehouse instead of 3, renegotiating vendor contracts within 30 days, protecting the employees who actually kept shipments moving, and removing 2 executive bonuses until cash flow stabilized. Her recommendations were firm, but never cruel. When the meeting ended, several people avoided her eyes. William waited until the room emptied, then approached with 2 cups of coffee from the side table. He handed her one and said, "You made difficult news sound survivable." Evelyn almost smiled. Most powerful men she knew praised women by making the compliment about charm. William praised the work. That was the first difference. He introduced himself simply, without listing titles, and asked how long she had been restructuring distressed companies. She gave him the professional answer, not the personal one. He did not press. Instead, he asked about the warehouse workers, the people whose names did not appear in board packets but whose lives changed when wealthy people made careless decisions. Evelyn remembered that question. Daniel would have asked about valuation. William asked about consequences. In the months that followed, their paths crossed again through Sterling Capital Projects. He requested her insight, then listened when she gave it. He never spoke over her in meetings. He never translated her ideas into his own words and accepted praise for them. When she disagreed, he leaned back, considered it, and asked her to explain more. It unsettled her at first, being respected without having to earn it twice. Slowly, the guarded part of her began to rest. Their conversations moved from conference rooms to quiet dinners after long workdays, then to Sunday walks through the public garden when the trees turned green and the city smelled like rain and cut grass. William learned that she drank coffee without sugar, hated being late, and bought flowers for herself every Friday. Evelyn learned that he sent handwritten notes to employees who retired, read every contract before signing it, and kept an old photograph of his mother inside his desk drawer because she had taught him that money was only useful when it protected dignity. He did not rescue Evelyn. She did not need rescuing. He simply stood beside the life she had rebuilt and treated it as something valuable. Back at the plaza, as Daniel moved through his wedding reception soaking in admiration, Evelyn thought of William's steady voice, his careful questions, his refusal to make her feel small so he could feel larger. Daniel had once looked at her and seen a woman who belonged to his beginning. William had looked at the same woman and seen the future before she ever had to prove it to the room. By the time Evelyn truly understood what William Sterling meant to her, love no longer felt like a storm arriving to overturn her life. It felt like a steady light left on in a quiet room. He did not demand the pieces of her story before she was ready to hand them over. He did not treat her past as a wound to study or a weakness to manage. He simply made space for the woman she had become, and in that space, Evelyn learned how peaceful affection could be when it was not asking her to disappear. Their wedding happened on a clear October afternoon in Vermont, beside a lake that held the sky so perfectly it looked painted. There were no society photographers, no flower walls built for attention, no guest list designed to prove anything. A dozen people stood with them under maple trees turning gold and red, while a local judge with kind eyes read the vows. Evelyn wore an ivory dress with long sleeves and a narrow ribbon at the waist. William wore a dark suit and the expression of a man who understood the honor of being chosen. When he placed the ring on her finger, he did not look proud because he had won her. He looked grateful because she had trusted him. Later, they had dinner in a small inn where the floors creaked and the candles leaned slightly in their holders. The food was simple: roasted chicken, warm bread, apple pie, coffee poured from a silver pot that had seen better years. Evelyn remembered laughing softly when William brushed a red leaf from her shoulder as they stepped outside into the cold evening air. She had not realized until that moment how long it had been since happiness felt private enough to be real. Months later, the envelope from Daniel arrived at her Boston office on a Monday morning, tucked between a vendor contract and a courier package from Chicago. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, edged in gold. Evelyn knew who it was from before she saw the return address. Her assistant placed it on the corner of her desk with a careful silence that said more than any question. Evelyn waited until the room was empty before opening it. Inside was the formal invitation, elegant and expensive, every line arranged to announce status as much as celebration. Daniel Pierce and Samantha Reed requested her presence at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. Beneath the printed words, in Daniel's familiar handwriting, was a single sentence. "I hope seeing me happy helps you move on." Evelyn read it once. Then again. Not because it hurt the way he wanted it to, but because the cruelty was so small, so polished, so unmistakably him. For a moment she saw the old hallway on the Upper West Side, the city lights behind his shoulder, the look on his face when he told her she no longer fit his life. Then the memory passed. It did not take her breath with it. William found her that evening at the kitchen island, the invitation lying open beside a cup of tea gone cold. Their Boston home was quiet, rain tapping against the windows, the city blurred beyond the glass. He picked up the card, read the note, and set it down without anger. That was one of the things Evelyn trusted most about him. His restraint was not emptiness. It was control. He asked her what she wanted to do. Evelyn looked at the invitation, at Daniel's handwriting, at the life she had built around herself with patience and clean hands. Then she said she wanted to go. Not for Daniel. Not for Samantha. Not for the people who would whisper over champagne and mistake attendance for weakness. She wanted to go because there were rooms in a person's past that stayed dark until you walked into them carrying your own light. William nodded once, as if he had already understood. He told her she owed Daniel nothing, but she owed herself the chance to leave without bleeding. On the night of the wedding, Evelyn stood before the mirror in their suite at the plaza, fastening a small pearl earring with steady fingers. Her midnight blue dress fell cleanly to the floor, elegant without asking for attention. The ring on her left hand caught the lamplight, not loudly, just enough. Outside the door, the ballroom music floated up through the hotel like a memory pretending to be alive. William appeared behind her in the mirror, calm in a black tuxedo, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. He did not ask if she was ready. He knew readiness was not always the absence of pain. Sometimes it was simply choosing not to let pain lead. Evelyn picked up her silver clutch, lifted her chin, and walked with him toward the room where Daniel believed he had arranged her humiliation, never imagining that the woman arriving was not returning to the past. She was arriving to close it. When Evelyn stepped out of the ballroom after Samantha's toast, no one stopped her. A few guests watched her cross the marble threshold with the quiet curiosity people save for someone they have already decided to pity, but she did not hurry, and she did not look back. The corridor outside the Plaza ballroom was cooler, hushed beneath gold sconces and tall mirrors that reflected the pale shine of polished floors. For one breath, the music became distant enough to sound like it belonged to someone else's life. William was waiting near the end of the hall, exactly where he had promised to be, not because Evelyn needed rescuing, but because he understood the dignity of letting her choose the first step alone. He looked up from his phone when he saw her, and whatever he read on her face made his expression soften without turning into concern. Evelyn did not explain the toast. She did not repeat Samantha's words or Daniel's smile. She simply reached for his hand. William closed his fingers around hers with quiet certainty. No dramatic question. No demand to confront anyone. Just warmth, steadiness, and a kind of respect that made the noise behind her feel smaller. For several seconds they stood beneath the hotel lights while waiters passed with silver trays and a bell-capped and rolled luggage toward the elevators. Then Evelyn took a slow breath and said she was ready. Together, they walked back toward the ballroom. The change happened before Daniel understood it. At first, it was only a shift in sound. The band was playing softly near the far wall, but the conversations closest to the entrance thinned, then stopped, then moved outward in a widening circle. People noticed Evelyn first because they expected her to return diminished, maybe with red eyes, maybe with a forced smile, maybe alone enough to confirm the story they had been told. Instead, she came through the doors with her shoulders relaxed, her midnight blue dress catching the chandelier light, and William Sterling beside her with one hand resting lightly at her back. He did not guide her as if she belonged to him. He moved with her as if the room belonged to either of them, and that was precisely why everyone looked. A banker near the bar straightened so quickly his drink nearly tipped. One of Daniel's board members stopped mid-sentence. A senior attorney from Pierce and Company turned pale around the mouth and whispered William's name to the woman beside him. The whisper traveled faster than the music. William Sterling. Sterling Capital. The private equity chairman who avoided cameras, bought distressed companies with surgical precision, and never attended events without a reason. Daniel saw the room react before he saw the man. He turned from a circle of laughing guests with his glass raised, still wearing the polished smile of a groom enjoying his own mythology. Then his eyes landed on William, and the smile stayed on his face a moment too long, as if his body needed time to receive what his pride refused to understand. Samantha noticed Daniel's pause. She followed his gaze, saw Evelyn standing beside a man the room had already begun to respect, and her confidence tightened into confusion. She looked at Evelyn's hand then, at the ring she had not bothered to notice earlier, a ring elegant enough not to beg for attention and unmistakable once seen. Across the ballroom, an older investor who had ignored Evelyn at dinner stepped forward to greet William, calling him Mr. Sterling with the careful warmth of a man who knew exactly how much power stood in front of him. William shook his hand politely, but his attention returned to Evelyn before the conversation could become performance. That small gesture landed harder than any announcement. He did not use her as decoration. He oriented himself around her. Daniel began walking toward them, slower than before. For the first time that evening, people did not move aside because he commanded the space. They moved aside because something larger than his pride had entered it. Evelyn watched him approach and felt no triumph rise in her chest, no hunger to see him embarrassed, no need to repay every old wound with a public one. What she felt was quieter and stronger. Completion. The same ballroom that had laughed at Samantha's cruelty now held its breath around Evelyn's calm. The same guests who had seen a name card that read former Mrs. Pierce now watched William Sterling place his hand gently over hers, not to claim her, but to affirm what Daniel had never learned to recognize. Daniel stopped a few feet away, close enough for Evelyn to see the uncertainty behind his eyes. Behind him, Samantha stood frozen beneath white orchids and expensive lights, suddenly aware that beauty, money, and applause could not protect a person from looking small. Evelyn did not speak first. She had learned long ago that power did not always arrive with a raised voice. Sometimes it entered quietly, hand in hand with the woman everyone thought had come to lose. Daniel recovered the shape of his smile before he recovered the feeling behind it. Years of investor dinners and magazine interviews had taught him how to arrange his face when a room began slipping out of his control, and for one fragile moment, he almost looked like himself again. He stepped forward with his glass still in hand, the gold wedding band on his finger catching the chandelier light, and said William's name with the warmth of a man pretending this encounter had been expected. "Mr. Sterling," he said, smooth enough for the guests nearest them to hear. "What an honor! I did not realize you were connected to Evelyn." The word connected hung there, polished and insulting in its softness. Samantha moved closer to Daniel's side, her smile returning in smaller, sharper pieces, as if she had found a way to make the moment harmless. Around them, the ballroom waited. A few guests pretended to study their drinks. Others made no effort to hide their attention. Evelyn stood beside William without reaching for attention or protection. She had spent too many years beside a man who needed every room to confirm his importance. She knew the difference now between being displayed and being respected. William looked at Daniel for only a second before turning his eyes back to Evelyn. That was the first answer. Then he placed his hand lightly over hers, not possessive, not theatrical, just certain. "She is not a connection," William said. His voice was quiet, but the room adjusted itself around it. "She is my wife." The sentence did not crash through the ballroom. It settled into it. The band faltered near the end of a measure. Someone near the bar drew in a small breath. Samantha's smile stopped moving. Daniel's eyes dropped to Evelyn's left hand, to the ring he had not noticed when he believed she had come alone and diminished. For a moment, Evelyn saw him trying to reorganize the world in his mind. The woman he had labeled past was standing in front of him as the present of a man he could not dismiss. But William was not finished, and Evelyn knew the second truth would cost Daniel more than the first. A senior partner from Sterling Capital approached with a folder in hand, stopping a respectful step behind William. Daniel recognized him immediately. So did two members of his board. The partner offered a polite nod to Evelyn and said the revised acquisition materials were ready for her review in the morning. Not William's review. Hers. The silence deepened until even the ice in the glasses seemed too loud. Daniel blinked once, slow and disbelieving. "Her review?" he asked, and the question came out before pride could dress it properly. William did not raise his voice. "Evelyn is the lead advisor on the Pierce & Company acquisition review," he said. "Sterling Capital relies on her judgment." Across the table, an older investor looked down as if suddenly fascinated by the pattern of the linen. The attorney who had whispered William's name earlier closed his mouth and took one careful step back. Samantha turned toward Daniel, confusion replacing the triumph she had worn so easily minutes before. Evelyn felt every gaze in the room return to her, but it no longer felt like exposure. It felt like recognition arriving late. Daniel's face changed in pieces. First surprise. Then calculation. Then something closer to fear, though he tried to hide it behind a laugh that found no support in the room. "Well," he said, "Evelyn always had a talent for finding her way into important rooms." Evelyn looked at him then, fully, and for the first time that night she allowed him to see the calm he had mistaken for weakness. She did not correct him. She did not defend herself. William's eyes cooled, but his tone remained composed. "She does not find her way into important rooms," he said. "She earns the right to lead them." No one laughed. Daniel's hand tightened around his glass, not enough to break anything, only enough to reveal what composure could not hide. The partner from Sterling Capital handed Evelyn the folder. She accepted it with a small nod, the same professional grace she had used in boardrooms from Boston to Chicago. Inside that folder were the reports Daniel had hoped no one would examine too closely: inflated projections, delayed liabilities, vendor disputes described as timing issues, and bonus approvals made while departments were being told to cut staff. Evelyn had seen it all. She had not brought those facts to his wedding as revenge. He had brought her here himself, placed her beneath the lights, and asked the room to witness her humiliation. Now the same room watched him understand that she had never been the weakest person at the table. Samantha lowered her champagne without taking a sip. Daniel looked from William to Evelyn, searching for some private softness he might still use, some old loyalty he had not already spent. Evelyn gave him nothing cruel. That was what made it impossible for him to fight. She only held the folder against her side, her shoulders relaxed, her face serene beneath the chandeliers. The truth had arrived without shouting, without scandal, without a single raised hand or broken glass. It stood there in a midnight blue dress, wearing a quiet ring, beside a man powerful enough to speak softly, and it made Daniel's grandest room feel suddenly very small. The ballroom did not recover all at once. It tried to. The band found its rhythm again, waiters resumed their careful circles, and guests returned to their plates with the strained politeness of people who had just witnessed a private cruelty become a public mistake. Daniel stood beneath the chandeliers with Samantha at his side, but the air around him had changed. Only minutes earlier, every laugh had belonged to him. Now every silence did. Evelyn could see him measuring the damage, calculating who had heard what, who might repeat it, which board member would ask questions in the morning, which investor would suddenly become unavailable. He looked toward William, then toward the folder in Evelyn's hand, and finally toward her face, searching for anger because anger would have made her easier to dismiss. She gave him none. That was when his confidence began to thin. Samantha touched his arm and whispered something. Evelyn could not hear, but Daniel barely reacted. His attention stayed on Evelyn, no longer mocking, no longer amused, no longer certain he knew the ending. After a moment, he stepped closer and lowered his voice. Evelyn, can we speak privately? The question was dressed as courtesy, but desperation showed at the seams. William did not answer for her. He simply looked at Evelyn, allowing the choice to remain exactly where it belonged. She nodded once and followed Daniel toward the marble corridor outside the ballroom, stopping near a tall window where Fifth Avenue glittered below in streams of yellow taxi lights. Behind them, the wedding music sounded distant and thin. Daniel turned to her with the face he used when asking investors for more time. Softer. Warmer. Almost humble, if someone did not know him well. I did not know you were involved in the review, he said. Evelyn looked at him quietly. The sentence was honest in one way and empty in another. Daniel had never known the things he did not bother to value. He had not known the price of the bracelet she sold, the names of the employees she protected, the hours she spent rebuilding his numbers, the shape of the loneliness he left behind. He had not known because knowing would have required him to look at her without using her. Please, he continued, glancing once toward the ballroom doors. Do not let old feelings affect a business decision. Pierce & Company has hundreds of employees. This deal matters. Evelyn watched the city move below them. Cars stopped and started. People crossed the street with collars raised against the night air. Life kept going, indifferent to men who believed their reputations were the center of the world. Old feelings are not the problem, she said. Her voice was calm enough that Daniel seemed to flinch from its steadiness. The problem is delayed liabilities, inflated projections, and executive bonuses approved while departments were told to cut costs. The problem is not what you did to me, Daniel. It is what you kept doing when no one in the room wanted to question you. He looked away first. That surprised neither of them. For a second, the man in the tuxedo disappeared, and she saw the young husband at the kitchen table in Queens, afraid of failure and hungry for belief. She had loved that man once. She had built beside him. But love did not obligate a woman to protect the version of a man who had chosen pride over honesty. Daniel swallowed, then tried one last door. After everything we were, he said, you could help me. Evelyn let the words settle between them. They did not hurt now. They sounded old, like a language she had stopped speaking. I did help you, she said. For years. You called it support when it served you, then called it weakness when you outgrew your gratitude. Daniel's face tightened, not with anger, but with the recognition that no performance remained. Evelyn held the folder at her side and stepped back. I will make the same recommendation I would make for any company with these numbers. Nothing more. Nothing less. The doors opened behind them, and William appeared in the corridor without hurry. He did not interrupt. He did not need to. Daniel looked past Evelyn at him, and whatever he saw there made him fall silent. Samantha's laughter rose briefly from inside the ballroom, Too bright, too forced, and then faded. Evelyn turned to leave. Daniel said her name once, quietly, as if the sound might still have power. She paused, not because he deserved another chance, but because she wanted to leave the past with a clean edge. "You did not lose me at the divorce," she said. "You lost me every time you made me feel small and expected me to call it love." Then she walked back to William. The next morning, Sterling Capital sent a formal email withdrawing from the acquisition process until Pierce and Company could complete a full independent audit. There was no public scandal, no headline, no dramatic speech. Just one clean decision delivered in professional language before 9 o'clock. By then, Evelyn was already leaving New York with William, seated beside him in the back of a black car as the plaza disappeared behind them. She looked out at the city, at the morning light sliding over glass towers and wet sidewalks, and felt no hunger to look back. Daniel had wanted witnesses for her humiliation. Instead, he had witnessed her freedom. She did not come back to ruin his wedding. She came back to prove he had never been the prize.